12 million people were torn from their families, chained, and loaded into the holds of ships to die on plantations across the Atlantic. Not for gold, not for oil, for the white powder you stir into your coffee every morning without thinking. Sugar. One crop, and it redrew the map of the world, destroyed civilizations, built modern capitalism, and it's still quietly killing us today. But here's the question nobody asks. What if sugar had never existed? Not a single crystal, ever. What would this world actually look like? The grass that changed everything. Here's something almost nobody knows. Sugar is a grass, just a wild reed that grew in the jungles of New Guinea around 10,000 years ago. Local people chewed the stalks for the sweet juice inside. Nothing special. One plant among thousands on an island most people couldn't point to on a map. Nobody could have predicted that this grass would one day trigger the largest forced migration of human beings in history. Nobody could have predicted that it would fund revolutions, collapse empires, and rewire the human brain on a scale that no drug in history has ever matched. But that's exactly what happened. The first people to turn sugarcane into crystallized sugar were Indians, around 350 AD. It was closer to alchemy than agriculture. They learned to press the cane, boil the juice down in massive copper vats, remove the impurities, and crystallize the result into a stable white powder that didn't spoil for months. That could survive ocean voyages. That could be stored, transported, and traded across entire continents. For the first time in human history, sweetness was portable. The Sanskrit word for it was sharkara. It meant gravel or small pebbles, because that's what the crystals looked like. And like gravel, it spread everywhere. Arab traders picked up the technology in the 7th century and carried it westward with a speed that matched the expansion of Islam itself. Persia, Egypt, North Africa, Sicily, Spain. Wherever the new faith spread, sugar followed. Arab agronomists didn't just trade it, they planted it, refined it, and turned it into an industry. The Arabic word sukar became the Italian zucchero, the French sucre, the English sugar. The word itself is a map of how it traveled. When the Crusaders arrived in the Holy Land in the 11th century, they encountered sugar for the first time. They called it sweet salt and brought samples back to Europe like trophies. The chronicles of the time describe soldiers cutting cane in the fields of Syria and chewing it raw, unable to stop. The addiction began before anyone understood what addiction was. Back in Europe, sugar remained almost impossibly rare for centuries. It was sold in pharmacies, by weight, as medicine. Physicians prescribed it for everything from sore throats to melancholy. A single pound cost the equivalent of several days' wages for a skilled craftsman. Kings and nobles used it to demonstrate their power. At royal banquets, enormous sculptures were constructed entirely from sugar. Castles with working drawbridges, hunting scenes with horses and hounds, ships with billowing sails, all made of sugar, all edible, all designed to be destroyed by the guests as a display of extravagant wealth. To eat sugar in medieval Europe was to consume something rarer than silver, and that's exactly why what happened next was so catastrophic. Because the moment the price came down, the moment sugar became available to everyone, the world was never the same again. The Islands of the Dead, 1493. Christopher Columbus returns to the New World for the second time. He brings horses, weapons, livestock, settlers, and in the hold of his ship, sugarcane cuttings from the Canary Islands. It seems like a small detail. It wasn't. The Caribbean turned out to be almost supernaturally perfect for sugarcane. The heat, the humidity, the volcanic soil, the reliable rainfall, conditions that European farmers could barely imagine. The Spanish began planting almost immediately. Then the Portuguese on the Brazilian coast. Then the French and Dutch and British as they carved out their own Caribbean colonies throughout the 17th century. The problem was labor. Growing sugarcane is brutally, almost incomprehensibly hard work. The cane has to be cut by hand with a heavy blade in intense tropical heat in fields that stretch to the horizon. It has to be processed within hours of cutting, or the sugar content degrades. The mills run day and night during harvest season. The boiling houses, where the juice is cooked down, are so hot that workers routinely passed out or fell into the vats. It was not work that anyone did willingly. The Spanish and Portuguese first attempted to use the indigenous people of the Caribbean, the Taino, the Caribs, the Arawaks. Within decades, they were gone. Smallpox, measles, typhus, overwork, massacre. Entire civilizations that had existed for thousands of years were erased within a single human lifetime. On the island of Hispaniola alone, the indigenous population fell from an estimated 300,000 in 1492 to fewer than 500 by 1550. They needed another solution. Africa. The first ship carrying enslaved Africans arrived in the Caribbean in 1518. It was the beginning of what historians call the transatlantic slave trade, the largest forced migration in human history, and one of the greatest crimes ever committed. Over the next 3 centuries, between 12 and 15 million people were transported across the Atlantic. The actual number who were captured, including those who died before boarding the ships, is estimated to be significantly higher. 15 million, more than the entire population of modern Sweden. Living people with families, languages, stories, futures, seized by rival kingdoms or European slavers, marched to the coast in chains, held in fortified dungeons called barracoons while they waited for ships, then loaded into holds where the space allotted to each person was roughly the size of a coffin. The crossing typically lasted 6 to 8 weeks. 1 in 5 died before the ship reached land. Their bodies were thrown into the Atlantic. Those who survived arrived on the plantations of Jamaica, Barbados, Cuba, San Domingue, Brazil. And there, their lives were worth less than the tools they worked with. Not metaphorically, literally. A good machete or a copper boiling pan cost more to replace than an enslaved person purchased at the cheaper end of the market. The economics were that brutal. It was cheaper to work people to death and buy new ones than to keep them healthy. The average life expectancy for an enslaved person arriving on a Caribbean sugar plantation, 7 years. 7 years of cutting cane from sunrise to sunset, 6 days a week, in heat that would kill an unacclimatized European within days. 7 years of inadequate food, brutal punishment for the smallest infractions, zero medical care, complete legal non-existence. 7 years, and then the body gave out. Plantation owners factored this into their accounts. It was a line item: depreciation of human assets. And in London, Paris, Lisbon, Amsterdam, merchants counted their profits. Aristocrats stirred that same sugar into their tea, and philosophers wrote treatises about the natural rights of man. How sugar built the modern world. This is the part the history books leave out. Sugar didn't just change what people eat. It didn't just fuel the slave trade. It created the entire architecture of the modern economy, the financial systems, the corporate structures, the industrial logic that still governs how the world works today. And it did all of this a full century before the Industrial Revolution that usually gets the credit. The Caribbean sugar plantations of the 18th century were the first true industrial enterprises in human history. Not the textile mills of Manchester, not the ironworks of the Ruhr Valley. The sugar estates of Jamaica and Barbados and Saint-Domingue. That's where, for the first time, thousands of workers performed highly specialized tasks in a precise, coordinated, unbroken production chain: cutting, hauling, milling, boiling, skimming, cooling, crystallizing, packing, running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week during harvest season, driven by targets and quotas and the relentless logic of maximizing output per unit of input. Every principle we associate with industrial capitalism, specialization of labor, continuous production, obsessive efficiency, the subordination of human beings to the demands of the production process, was developed first on sugar plantations. The plantation owners were proto-industrialists. Their account books, with detailed records of inputs, outputs, depreciation, and returns on capital, would look familiar to any modern business school professor. The only difference between a sugar plantation and a 19th century factory was that one used enslaved people and one used wage workers. Economically, the logic was identical, and the money that flowed from this system reshaped the entire Western world. The banks that provided financing for slave voyages and plantation development became the banks that later funded canals, railways, and factories. Barclays Bank traces its origins to a Quaker family deeply involved in financing the slave trade, a history the bank formally acknowledged only in 2020. Lloyd's of London, which insured slave ships and their human cargo, became the world's leading insurance market. The wealth accumulated through sugar and slavery didn't disappear when abolition came. It was reinvested. It became the capital that powered the Industrial Revolution. This is not a footnote. It is the central fact of how the modern economy was built. The cities that grew rich on sugar money still carry the evidence in their architecture: Bristol and Liverpool in England, Bordeaux and Nantes in France, Amsterdam in the Netherlands. the grand townhouses, the civic buildings, the universities endowed by merchant families, the museums filled with art purchased with trading profits. All of it built, at least in part, on the system that kept 15 million people in chains to keep the price of sugar affordable for European consumers. And while this vast economic transformation was happening at the macro level, something equally profound was happening inside the human body. Before the 17th century, sweetness was rare in almost every human diet on Earth. Honey was expensive, fruit was seasonal. The human palate had evolved over hundreds of thousands of years in a world where sweet things were scarce and therefore worth seeking out urgently. Our brains are wired to crave sugar because for most of human history, sugar meant calories, and calories meant survival. Then, suddenly, sugar was everywhere. Cheap, abundant, available to anyone. Tea with sugar became the national drink of the British working class. It provided quick energy and suppressed hunger, which made it valuable to people doing brutal physical labor on inadequate food. Coffee with sugar conquered the coffee houses of Europe. Chocolate, which the Aztecs had consumed as a bitter, unsweetened ceremonial drink, was mixed with sugar and became the first mass-market confectionery. Jam, candy, pastries, sweetened spirits. The entire landscape of what humans ate and drank transformed within a few generations, and humanity got hooked. Not as a metaphor, literally, neurologically hooked. Sugar activates the brain's dopamine reward system, the same system triggered by cocaine, by alcohol, by gambling. The brain receives a spike of pleasure and immediately begins anticipating the next one. Tolerance builds, the craving intensifies. The industry that understood this, consciously or not, had discovered something more powerful than any drug. A substance that was legal, socially encouraged, cheap to produce, and that the human brain was fundamentally unable to resist. They had found the perfect product. Revolution and blood. The history of sugar is not only a history of exploitation, it is also a history of resistance, of what happens when human beings pushed to the absolute limit of what they can endure decide that death is preferable to another day in the fields. 1791. The French colony of Saint-Domingue, the western third of the island of Hispaniola, which the world now calls Haiti. At this moment, this small island produces approximately 40% of all the sugar consumed in Europe and more than half of its coffee. It is the single most profitable piece of real estate on Earth. France extracts from it the equivalent of billions of dollars in today's money every year. The colony is home to around 500,000 enslaved people, 30,000 free people of color, and 40,000 white colonists. The mathematics of this situation are explosive. On the night of August 22nd, the enslaved population rose. What followed was unlike anything the colonial world had ever seen. This was not a desperate, disorganized uprising that could be put down in a few days. It was a revolution, planned, coordinated, strategically sophisticated, led by people of remarkable military and political intelligence. Toussaint Louverture, a formerly enslaved man who had taught himself to read and had studied Caesar's military campaigns, emerged as its defining leader. The revolution lasted 13 years. The revolutionary forces defeated the French colonial army. They defeated a British expeditionary force of 20,000 soldiers sent to seize the colony while France was distracted. Britain lost more men in Haiti than in any military campaign of the 18th century, most of them to yellow fever. Then they faced Napoleon's brother-in-law, Charles Leclerc, at the head of 40,000 of the finest soldiers in Europe, the veterans of Austerlitz and the Italian campaigns, sent specifically to restore slavery and French control. They defeated them too. In 1804, the revolutionaries declared independence and named their country Haiti, from the indigenous Taino word for the island, meaning land of high mountains. It was the first nation in the Western Hemisphere to permanently abolish slavery, the first black republic in history, the only successful slave revolution in the recorded history of the world. Napoleon was not just defeated, he was humiliated. He had lost his most valuable possession and 50,000 soldiers in the attempt to keep it. His dream of a French empire in the Americas was finished. And it was this, specifically this, the loss of Saint-Domingue's sugar revenues, that led him to conclude that maintaining French territory in North America was no longer worth the expense or the military risk. In 1803, he sold Louisiana to the United States for $15 million. The Louisiana Purchase doubled the size of the United States overnight. It added what would become 15 states to the Union. It opened the Mississippi River to American commerce. It set the trajectory for American continental expansion throughout the 19th century. Think about that. The borders of modern America weren't determined by war or diplomacy. They were determined by a slave rebellion on a Caribbean island. Meanwhile, the Napoleonic Wars were reshaping European sugar economics in their own way. The British naval blockade cut continental Europe off from Caribbean sugar imports. Prices tripled, quadrupled, and then German scientists did something that seemed impossible. They figured out how to extract sugar from ordinary beets that grew in the temperate European climate. By 1813, France alone had 500 beet sugar factories. The Caribbean monopoly collapsed. Prices crashed. Sugar became available to absolutely everyone, and humanity began consuming it in quantities that evolution never anticipated. The quiet killer. Today, the world produces approximately 180 million tons of sugar every year. That number is almost impossible to visualize. It works out to roughly 22 kilograms for every man, woman, and child on the planet every year. The average American consumes closer to 57 kilograms annually, which translates to about 17 teaspoons per day, against a recommended maximum of 6. But most people consuming those 17 teaspoons never see them. sugar is hidden in 74% of all packaged food products sold in American supermarkets. It's in the bread, in the ketchup, in the salad dressing, in the pasta sauce, the yogurt, the breakfast cereal, the granola bar with the mountain on the packaging. It's in cough syrup, in baby food, in vitamin supplements, in products marketed specifically as healthy or natural or diet. Food technologists have identified more than 60 different names that sugar appears under on ingredient labels. Dextrose, maltose, evaporated cane juice, high fructose corn syrup, cane crystals, fruit juice concentrate. A deliberate strategy to make it harder for consumers to understand how much they're actually consuming. This is not accidental. It is engineered. The food industry discovered decades ago that adding sugar to almost any product increases consumption. Sugar makes food more palatable. It accelerates eating. It creates the neurological reward loop that makes people reach for more. It's not added to make food taste better in any simple sense. It's added because it makes food addictive. And addiction is good for business. But the darkest chapter of the sugar story isn't what the industry has done in recent decades. It's what it did in the 1960s, when the first serious scientific threat to its business model appeared. In 1965, a British physiologist named John Yudkin published research suggesting that sugar, not fat, was the primary dietary cause of heart disease, obesity, and type 2 diabetes. His evidence was substantial. His methodology was sound. His conclusions, if accepted, would have transformed dietary guidelines worldwide and devastated the sugar industry. The industry moved swiftly and ruthlessly to destroy him. An organization called the Sugar Research Foundation, funded by the major American sugar producers, commissioned and paid for research specifically designed to discredit Yudkin's findings and redirect scientific attention toward dietary fat as the villain. They recruited prominent nutrition researchers, including scientists at Harvard, to publish review articles in leading medical journals. These articles cited industry-funded studies, dismissed contrary evidence, and concluded that fat, not sugar, was the public health enemy. What they did not disclose, what they were under no legal obligation at the time to disclose, was who was paying for the research. This operation succeeded beyond anything the industry could have hoped for. John Yudkin was professionally destroyed. His book, Pure, White and Deadly, published in 1972, was attacked so ferociously by industry-aligned scientists that it became effectively unpublishable in the United States. He died in relative obscurity in 1995, his life's work officially dismissed. For the next 50 years, the official dietary advice of governments, health organizations, and medical associations around the world told people to reduce fat and largely ignored sugar. The food industry responded by producing an enormous range of low-fat products and replacing the fat with sugar because fat-free food tastes like cardboard without something to compensate. People bought these products believing they were making healthy choices. They were not. The internal documents proving the industry's decades of deliberate deception were finally uncovered by researchers at the University of California, San Francisco, and published in JAMA, Internal Medicine, in 2016. The Sugar Research Foundation's own archived records showed clearly what had been done and why. The industry's response was a statement noting that science has evolved since the 1960s. Today, more than 500 million people live with type 2 diabetes. By 2045, that number is projected to reach 700 million, 1 in 10 people on Earth. Obesity, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, cardiovascular illness, and a growing body of research drawing connections between chronic excess sugar consumption and cognitive decline. The plantations are gone. The enslaved people were freed, but the mechanism of building an industry on human dependency, of suppressing evidence of harm to protect profits, of treating human beings as units of consumption to be managed and maximized, that mechanism is still running. It never stopped. Finale. A world without sugar. No transatlantic slave trade on the scale that actually happened. No plantation factories that became the prototype for every industrial enterprise that followed. No Haitian Revolution. No Louisiana Purchase. A different map of the United States. A world shaped in almost every way differently than the one we actually live in. 1. Grass. From the jungle of an island most people couldn't find on a map. But here's what should actually stop us cold. We tell ourselves a story about history. In the story, the bad things happened in the past, and the people who allowed them to happen were different from us, less enlightened, less moral, products of their time. We have moved on. We know better now. The sugar industry doesn't support that story. The sugar industry didn't end slavery. It modernized it. When physical coercion became politically and legally untenable, it switched to neurological coercion. It replaced chains with dopamine loops. It replaced the overseer's whip with the marketing department. It replaced the plantation with the supermarket aisle. And when science began to expose what it was doing to human bodies, it bought the scientists. When the law began to require disclosure, it invented 60 different names for the same substance. It has been doing continuously and without interruption exactly what it has always done, extracting profit from human dependency at whatever cost to human welfare the market will bear. The difference between a sugar plantation in 1750 and a sugar corporation in 2026 is not moral, it is technological. The difference is that now the victims pay voluntarily. They stand in checkout lines and put the product in their own baskets. They feed it to their children. They consume it in quantities that are slowly killing them, while the industry that engineered that consumption funds research to suggest that personal responsibility, not product design, is the issue. And they call it a lifestyle. Humanity has always found a way to enslave itself for something sweet. And every single time, without a single exception in 10,000 years of recorded history. It called that progress.